The story of South Australian wine is rich and complex, and I'm going to get through this entire thing without once saying good day, mate. Damn it. It's Pocket Wine School. Hi, I'm Tommy with Pocket Wine School, the channel where we learn wine by cutting through the myths, jargon, and pseudoscience. This episode we're talking about South Australian wine. South Australia is a tiny, tiny place. And by tiny, I mean it's 750 miles wide and touches every other Australian state except Tasmania. And yet the winemaking area only makes up a small part, located almost exclusively in the southeast. Most of the rest of South Australia is just too hot to grow quality Vitis vinifera, the species of grape that wine drinkers know and love. But in the areas along the coast, where cool breezes from the Southern Ocean help to moderate those harsh temperatures, some of the world's most wonderful reds and whites grow quite well and become some of the world's most powerful wines. The most important red grape in the area is the French Syrah grape, only the Aussies don't call it that. They call it Shiraz for reasons that are debatable. A long-standing theory was that the grape wasn't actually native to France. It had been brought there by the ancient Persian port city of Shiraz. And that makes a great story. But since this is Pocket Wine School, where we treat wine stories the same way we treat the tales of Richard Gere and his gerbil, you know where this is going. DNA testing has shown that the Persian origin story is exceedingly unlikely, although that same DNA testing has raised questions about the grape's relationship to JonBenet Ramsey. The more likely reason for the use of the name Shiraz is that James Busby, the English viticulturist who first brought French grapes to the Australian continent in the 1830s, called it Syrah in his diary, and then drew a lipstick heart around it, maybe. This doesn't mean that there aren't general distinctions between the wines called Syrah and wines called Shiraz, even though it's the exact same grape. Shiraz wines are thought to be fruitier and even slightly chocolatey compared with the more peppery French original. But these are only rules of thumb and should not be considered legally binding. The main white grape in South Australia is Riesling, although it's really not the kind of sweet Riesling you got from Walmart that night when you and Grayson got wasted and watched scary movies until you puked. Australian Riesling is often quite dry, marked not by apricot and honey, but by lime and other citrus flavors, and holy crap, is it delicious. But let's talk a little bit more specifically about where in South Australia these delicious grapes are growing, and whether there are other grapes there. Spoiler alert, yes, of course there are. Now, I'm going to put up a map of the main South Australian wine regions, and I will tell you beforehand that yes, these highlighted regions do make a shape that looks kind of like a particular organ set common to roughly half the population. But I will remind you that we have to keep our minds out of the gutter and our language clean, because this is a children's wine channel. It's not? Oh, okay. Yeah, it looks like a dick and balls. The first region we'll discuss is Barossa, which is the testicle to the west. This is Australia's biggest wine district, at least for premium quality wines, although it has to be said that in wines labeled Barossa simply, grapes can also come from the neighboring eastern testicle, Eden Valley. Barossa was founded by Polish immigrants, most of whom came over because of one particular Polish convict that went on to have success as a wheat farmer. And yes, that is totally true. The area is home to some of the country's greatest Shiraz, coming largely from the central and northwestern parts of the region. This is a hot, dry place, but with cool nights. Those cool nights help preserve the grape's acids, keeping them from being too flabby, while those hot, dry days force all of the available resources, nutrients, water, and the like, into the grapes instead of into the leafy parts of the vine. The result? Big, beefy Shiraz that will smack you in the face, tell everyone at school that you made out with it, and you won't say jack because you love it. You know you do. This area is interesting because the Australians have done an incredibly excellent job at keeping out the vine-destroying pest phylloxera. Most of this is through strict quarantine, which requires intense care and vigilance. A few other grapes are grown to make quality wines here, notably Grenache, from some very old vines, and the Mourvedre grape, although the Australians use the name Matara, one of the many Spanish names for this meaty grape. Now, if Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvedre sound like a familiar grouping to you, that's because they had a terrible folk band in the 1960s. But also, this is the famous GSM blend that signifies the much respected blends of the Southern Rhone, specifically Châteauneuf-du-Pape. Cabernet Sauvignon also does reasonably well here, as does Chardonnay, which has recently taken over Semillon as Baroissa's signature white grape. But nothing comes close to dominating the region like Shiraz. Eden Valley, the eastern testicle, is higher in elevation than Barossa and is rich with eucalyptus groves. And while it's claimed that the presence of eucalyptus influences the minty notes in some Australian Cabernet, the grape that truly defines Eden Valley is Riesling. Eden Valley Riesling benefits from the higher elevation, which sharpens those acids and helps bring out the floral notes. As the wines age, they develop complex, toasty notes. And boy, do they age. Riesling's high acid contents allow the wines to improve in bottle for quite some time. These vineyards themselves have been around for a long time. They were established in the 1840s by a European-trained winemaker named Joseph Gilbert, who moved to the area to raise sheep and establish the Pusey Vale Winery. These vineyards are now owned by Yalumba. And yet, Eden Valley isn't the only Riesling superstar in South Australia, in that it's joined by Clare Valley, an isolated patch high up in the rural north. So to continue our phallic metaphor, this small patch high up above the winemaking wang is its, let's say, Brazilian. This is all farmland up here, and there are a ton of different kinds of soil, but especially limestone and slate. These are those exceedingly dry, lime-flavored Rieslings I was talking about earlier. But Clare Valley also grows some really nice, plump Shiraz and Cabernet Sauvignon. Both of those are definitely worth a try. Clare Valley is also the region where screwcaps took off. The idea was that screwcaps, which are designed to allow less oxygen to reach the wine, can protect the essence of Riesling. And for those of you who think of the screwcap as signifying a lesser quality wine, just know that it really, really doesn't. I know it's less romantic, but they're really excellent at preserving the crisp, fruity flavors of a wine. Screwcaps were actually developed in France in the late 60s on behalf of Australia's Yalumba Winery. Once they were satisfied, other Australian wineries like Penfold's championed it, putting screwcaps in production in 1976. There was some consumer resistance in the 1980s, mostly because that decade was defined by elegance and restraint, as shown in the fashions of Cyndi Lauper and Hulk Hogan. In the 1990s, the screwcap began to rise in prominence, and now it's even used by some high-end French winemakers, like in Chablis. So don't scoff when your waiter unscrews your wine at the table. And for God's sake, don't pick up the cap and sniff it. Smoke taint. It's not just a term for the Marlboro man's saddle sores. It's a real issue in grape growing and winemaking that can devastate the vintages for an entire region. What's worse, it's becoming more and more likely as the world gets hotter and hotter. Whatever your feelings are about the causes of climate change, although it's getting harder and harder to have more than that one specific opinion about the causes of climate change, it is absolutely true that the planet is getting hotter. And with that, wildfires in certain areas are on the rise. And certain of those certain areas are vineyards, which provide the most important resource for our precious, precious wine. In a nutshell, smoke taint refers to an excess of certain compounds caused by exposure of grapes to smoke that produce unpleasant flavors in wine. These flavors are usually thought of not simply as smoky, but like cigarette ash, medicine, and burnt wood. Sort of like being given mouth-to-mouth by your Boy Scout camp counselor, Tom Waits. These compounds are called volatile phenols, and they're produced by burning lignin, the material that makes wood so stiff. They're airborne particles that are caused by smoke, although it's important to note that these aren't the gray particles that we associate with smoke. These are much smaller, almost microscopic. Now, here's where it gets tricky. These particles can't simply be wiped off the grape. They are absorbed into the grape skin, where they bond with grape sugars to form glycosides. This process has evolved as a defense mechanism, and what's interesting is that the sugar bonding process actually makes the volatile phenols inert. Hence, when you bite into one of these grapes, you don't smell or taste the smoke. It's been neutralized. And though this sounds good, it actually makes things much harder for winemakers, as it makes it very difficult to tell whether or not a grape has been affected. You only know once you've made the wine, because it's the process of fermentation itself that releases those volatile phenols. But it doesn't stop there. They continue to develop during storage, during aging, and even in your mouth, when enzymes in your saliva cause the sudden release of these aromas. So when we look at these wine growing areas that have been heavily affected by wildfires, it's hard not to throw up our hands and write everything off. California, Australia, Oregon, Chile, and Washington State make the news quite a bit, but they're not the only important regions to deal with smoke damage. And yet, like everything else in this confusing, unreliable universe, even this is tricky, because no matter what the nature of the wildfire is, a vineyard's exposure to smoke is no guarantee of smoke taint. The further the smoke has to travel, the less concentration there is of these unwanted volatile phenols. The grapes also matter. Thicker skinned grapes like Cabernet Sauvignon seem to handle smoke damage a little bit better than thinner skinned grapes like Pinot Noir or that grape from the Fruit of the Loom commercials. Even in seemingly devastating situations, smoke exposure is still no guarantee of damage. Washington State got hit hard by wildfires in 2018, but the vintage not only escaped smoke taint, many wine drinkers consider this one of Washington State's best vintages. And yet it's estimated that only 20% of people can even smell smoke taint. So is it really that bad of a problem? Yep. The estimated cost of the 2020 wildfires to California and Oregon's wine industry is around $3.7 billion. Or to put it in terms of two-buck chuck, 1.85 billion bottles of two-buck chuck. So is there anything that can be done about it? Thankfully, yes. Even though these volatile phenols can't be smelled or tasted, chemical analysis can check for the presence of the two most common problem compounds. Moreover, modern winemaking science has developed quite a few techniques that can mitigate the effects of volatile smoke phenols on resulting wine. Many of these revolve around decreasing maceration time, where the juice soaks up color, flavor, and other compounds from the skin. One technique in particular, flash de Taint, involves very quickly heating the grapes up to high temperatures and moving them into a vacuum, causing color compounds to explode and saturate the juice before any unwanted compounds are absorbed. White wines, of course, are much less likely to be affected as they spend very little time, if any, on their skins. And as white wines made from red grapes like Pinot Noir, Merlot, and even Cabernet Sauvignon are becoming more popular, this remains another viable option for using tainted grapes. And of course, there are companies out there trying to solve the problem through filtration. One company in particular, called Maverick, spelled M-A-V-R-I-K, as if Tom Cruise's character from Top Gun had become a 90s rapper, claims to have invented a filtration technique that completely removes the taint. The smoke taint, not Tom Cruise's taint. Tom Cruise's taint is still, fortunately, intact. In the 1840s, an English physician named Dr. Christopher Rawson Penfold decided to get really into wine. His interest wasn't so much with the deep complexity of the beverage, nor with its fascinating relationship with culture or food. Instead, he became obsessed with wine's medicinal properties. In other words, he was like your stoner friend Kyle, who thinks that pot is the cure for everything from stomach cancer to nuclear arms proliferation. And so Dr. Penfold took a trip to Europe, and in 1844 he brought French vines to Australia and started a vineyard. As Penfold was a 19th century physician, he believed that the best medicines were the ones that got you the most intoxicated. So the first medicinal wines he made were fortified wines, meaning they had additional alcohol poured into them. Shockingly, these liver-destroying, liquor-goggling, locomotive-powering wines became quite popular with the townfolk. And soon the new Penfold winery took advantage of its moment to branch out and make some other flavors of its grape-based fortified medicine for, science reasons. But it's important to note that this wasn't exactly Dr. Penfold's doing. His doctor duties took him away from winemaking, and the operation was taken over by his wife, Mary. And Mary, being a 19th century woman living in the shadow of her professional husband, did exactly what you would expect her to do. Just about single-handedly invent the Australian premium wine industry. By the time Dr. Penfold died in 1859, Mary was running Penfolds, treating the vineyard and winery not just as a business, but as a learning opportunity. Within 15 years, she'd become legendary in the region for her winemaking skills and her business acumen. Moreover, she devoted a considerable amount of energy to fighting the invasion of phylloxera, the grapevine-killing insect that was currently decimating the European wine industry. Due in part to the efforts of Mary and other growers like her, phylloxera has largely left South Australia alone to this day. In 1844, she retired. By that time, Penfold was not only producing a ton of wine, it owned about a third of the wine stores in all of Australia. Within another 20 years, it would be the largest winery in Adelaide and would spread to several other important Australian winemaking regions. By the mid-20th century, Australian tastes began to change from fortified wines to table wines, and Penfolds helped lead that charge. The company's chief winemaker at that time was a man named Max Schubert, and Penfolds sent him to Europe to study the sherry wines of Spain. But while he was in Europe, he decided to make a pit stop in Bordeaux. And upon tasting the table wines of Bordeaux, he exclaimed, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Holy fucking shit, this hooch is off the chain." When he made it back to Australia, he decided to take things in a new direction. He started work on a Bordeaux-style wine made not with the Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot that defines that famous French region, but with the Syrah that Australians had gotten so good at, despite calling it Shiraz. In 1952, Schubert put out his first Bordeaux-instyled creation, a Shiraz-based wine he called Grange Hermitage, after the famous Syrah-producing Rhone appellation Hermitage. And after the Penfolds board of directors got to taste it for the first time, they exclaimed, and again, I'm paraphrasing here, "Dude, this sucks donkey dicks, never make it again." But Schubert persisted, making it every year, presumably while extending one middle finger in the board's direction. And in 1962, the release of the 7-year-old 1955 Penfolds Grange Hermitage took the Australian wine world by storm, cementing Penfolds as the country's most important premium wine producer. In the years since then, it's won 50 gold medals, won the Wine Spectator's Wine of the Year award, and allegedly is secretly behind all the works of Banksy. And all this truly started with the singularly impressive Mary Penfold. How badass was she? She used a telescope to spy on her workforce, and when she went down to check on them in person, she did so riding on a white mare, presumably while having her feet massaged by a very docile Chuck Norris. Next episode, we're going to be talking about Beaujolais, so see you then.